The cafe clock ticked louder with every passing minute, each second landing like a small wound on her patience and pride. And by the time 2 full hours had slipped away, she had already accepted the quiet humiliation that comes when hope shows up dressed as foolishness. People around her laughed, cups clinked, chairs scraped the floor, life moved on without noticing her stillness. And she wondered how something as simple as a blind date could make her feel so painfully visible and invisible at the same time. She had rehearsed excuses for leaving, imagined the sympathetic look she would give herself in the mirror later, and decided that this would be the last time she trusted a stranger's promise. And then the door opened, and the man who walked in shattered every expectation she had been clinging to. Before the story pulls you any deeper, take a moment right now. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the quiet miracles that happen when people least expect them, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. These small actions help stories like this find the hearts that need them most. She had arrived early, of course. She always did. Being early was her way of proving to herself that she was still responsible, still reliable, still worthy of effort even after life had taught her how easily people disappeared. The cafe was warm and softly lit, the kind of place that made loneliness feel almost romantic if you didn't sit with it too long. She chose a table near the window, ordered a coffee she barely touched, and checked her phone more times than she wanted to admit. The messages from the dating app were still there, friendly and thoughtful, full of small details that made her believe this meeting might be different. He had said he might be late because of work, and she had smiled at that, telling herself that responsibility was a good sign. 15 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. With every glance at the door, her optimism thinned, replaced by a familiar ache that whispered she should have known better. As time dragged on, her thoughts drifted backward to the years that had shaped her into someone who waited too long for people who never arrived. She had been married once back when promises felt solid and forever sounded believable. That marriage ended not with a dramatic betrayal, but with a slow erosion of care, a quiet neglect that hurt more because it was invisible to everyone else. After the divorce, she learned how to rebuild herself piece by piece, how to smile at work, how to eat dinner alone without crying, how to convince friends she was fine. Dating again was supposed to be a sign of progress, proof that she was ready to let someone new in. Sitting alone in that cafe, she wondered if it was actually a mistake, a reopening of wounds she had spent years learning to close. The second hour was the hardest. By then, the staff had begun to recognize her as the woman who had been there too long with only 1 cup of coffee. She felt exposed, as if her disappointment was written across her face. She considered leaving at least a dozen times, each time telling herself just 5 more minutes. Those 5 minutes stretched thin, filled with self-blame and doubt. Maybe she had misunderstood the time. Maybe she wasn't interesting enough to deserve an explanation. Maybe this was simply the universe reminding her to lower her expectations. She gathered her bag, ready to stand up and walk away with what dignity she could salvage when the door opened again. The man who entered did not look like the one she had imagined during those long, waiting hours. He was older than his photos suggested, with streaks of gray in his hair and a tiredness in his eyes that spoke of long days and heavy responsibilities. He walked with a slight stiffness, carrying a worn leather bag that looked like it had followed him through years of hard-earned routines. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing polished in the way dating profiles often try to be. And yet there was something undeniably real about his presence, something grounded that made the noise of the cafe soften around him as he paused, scanning the room. Her first reaction was confusion, followed quickly by disappointment. This was not the man she had been picturing. This was not the easy fantasy that had helped her endure the wait. She felt foolish again, caught between leaving and staying, between protecting herself and giving this moment one last chance. When his eyes finally found her, there was no smooth confidence in his expression, only relief mixed with nervous uncertainty. He moved toward her table slowly, as if afraid she might vanish if he hurried. What struck her most was not his appearance, but the weight he seemed to carry, the kind that does not come from age alone but from responsibility, loss, and persistence. As he sat down, she noticed his hands tremble slightly, noticed the deep breath he took as if he had been holding it for far too long. She braced herself for an excuse, for a shallow apology that would confirm her worst assumptions. Instead, she felt the atmosphere shift, the tension she had built around her heart hesitating, unsure of how to respond. As the minutes passed, something unexpected happened. The irritation she had nursed for 2 hours began to loosen its grip. He did not try to impress her. He did not pretend to be someone else. There was an honesty in the way he carried himself, a vulnerability that felt rare and disarming. She learned, not through dramatic revelations, but through small, unguarded moments, that his lateness was not carelessness. He was a single father who had just come from the hospital, where his teenage son had undergone a minor but frightening procedure. He had sat by a hospital bed longer than planned, choosing reassurance over punctuality, knowing he might lose this chance but unwilling to abandon his responsibility. Her perspective shifted quietly, like a sunrise you do not notice until the light is already there. The 2 hours she had spent waiting began to feel smaller in comparison to the years he had spent showing up for someone who depended on him. She recognized the tiredness in his eyes because she had seen it in her own reflection during her hardest seasons. In that shared understanding, something softened between them. The café faded into the background as they both settled into the simple act of being present, of letting the walls they had built for survival rest for a moment. She found herself listening more than she spoke, absorbing the way he talked about life not as a series of achievements, but as a collection of moments that mattered. He spoke about learning patience through fatherhood, about the quiet fear of raising a child alone, about the guilt of wanting companionship while already feeling stretched thin. None of it felt rehearsed. None of it felt like a performance. It felt like truth, offered without guarantee of acceptance. And in that honesty, she felt something stir that she had almost forgotten how to recognize: respect. The challenge she faced was no longer about being stood up or disappointed. It was about deciding whether she was brave enough to let go of the version of love she had imagined and make space for the one unfolding in front of her. She had spent so long protecting herself from being hurt again that she had forgotten how protection could sometimes become a prison. Sitting across from this imperfect, sincere man, she realized that second chances rarely arrive in the form we expect. They come quietly, carrying flaws, asking us to see beyond the surface. By the time they stood to leave, the 2 hours of waiting no longer felt wasted. They felt necessary, like a test of endurance that had prepared her for a different kind of connection. She stepped outside into the cooling evening air with a strange mix of calm and possibility settling in her chest. There were no promises made, no dramatic declarations, just a shared understanding that something meaningful had begun, not because it was easy, but because it was real. If this story is touching something inside you right now, if it's reminding you of a time you waited or hoped or almost walked away, please pause and show some love. Like the video, share it with someone who believes in unexpected grace, and let us know in the comments how this story made you feel. Your engagement helps these stories reach hearts that are still waiting for their own turning point. As she walked home that night, she reflected on how close she had come to leaving, to closing herself off once again. She realized that kindness is not just something we give to others. It is something we allow ourselves to receive. Waiting 2 hours had felt like rejection, but staying had opened the door to understanding. Life, she understood now, does not reward us for perfect timing, but for patience, empathy, and the courage to stay when walking away would be easier. Before this story ends, I want to ask you something special. Please take a moment and comment below with a single word that represents what this story meant to you. Hope, patience, love, healing, or even waiting. Your words matter more than you know. In the end, the man who arrived did shock her, not because he was late, not because he failed to meet her expectations, but because he reminded her that the most meaningful connections are born not from flawless beginnings, but from imperfect moments met with understanding. And sometimes, the longest waits lead us exactly where we are meant to be.